My name is Jenny Cresswell. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. I'm going to be sharing with you the results of a descriptive study that we've done in 3 Francophone African countries, looking at severe complications, so near miss and quality of care in these hospitals. A large number of people have contributed to this work, which has been led by Veronique Philippi and Corinne Ronsman at the London School. Near miss is a concept which has been used for a long time in the maternal healthcare field, and people have suggested that a similar concept could be applied to the newborn. It's not a new concept. Different scoring systems, some using the term near miss, some using another set of terminology, have been used many times before. For example, in high-income settings, looking at potential causes for sudden infant death syndrome. However, there isn't yet any consensus on a set of criteria which could be used to operationalise neonatal near miss. Following on from maternal near miss, a near miss would need to be defined as a neonate who died but survived a severe complication. And just to reiterate, by definition, a near miss has to survive. In low-income settings, low and middle-income settings, there's been 2 main groups working in this area. The first is Robert Pattinson, who's already spoken today, and they have proposed a set of management markers of organ dysfunction to measure near miss, which I'll go on to discuss more in a minute. There's also another group of authors based at WHO who, using the WHO multi-country survey, have suggested what they call pragmatic markers of near miss, which means infants who have 1 or more of a low birth weight below 1,750 grams, a gestational age lower than 33 weeks, or a 5-minute apnea score less than 7. And they proposed these markers because they're easier, they need less information, they're easier to record in a low facility setting than organ dysfunction. And in our study, we've got data to compare both different methods. So what I'm going to be showing you here is an exploration of the use of neonatal near miss in Benin, Burkina Faso and Morocco. This was an exploratory study. The primary aim was actually, we were looking at user fee removal subsidy policies. We wanted to focus on newborns, so we added these questions in. But the study was not primarily designed to look at the neonate. So what we did is we collected data in 17 hospitals in Benin, Burkina Faso and Morocco. The way data was collected was through the use of medical records. So if a case was relevant to our study, we had a form which was a few pages long and full of checkboxes, which was attached to the medical records. Everything here is paper-based. There's no computers, DOS or otherwise. So it's all based on paper, and the physician or the midwife, whoever's caring for the woman, basically ticks whether various indicators of care have been done, about the symptoms, time of arrival, time of discharge, all that kind of information. Data collection was prospective, taking place during 2012 and 2013, and we selected all complicated deliveries, so any maternal death, any maternal near miss, all caesarean deliveries regardless of indication, all stillbirth, all neonatal death, all neonatal near miss, all non-cephalic presentations, and then for uncomplicated deliveries we took a sample within each hospital. Near miss here we're defining using an adapted definition of Pattinson's criteria, which I'll show you on the next slide. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'm just talking about the singleton births. So these are the sets of markers of organ dysfunction which we used to define near miss in this study. A neonate was near miss if they had 1 or more of these. And there's 23 of them, so I won't read them all out, but they're basically organised according to the organ system, which this is a marker of dysfunction, also respiratory, cardiac, and so on. So first of all, amongst the neonates, which were the most common criteria that we observed, and overwhelmingly it was those related to the respiratory system. So out of all neonatal near miss, there were 416 identified. 87% had a problem of respiration in some way, followed by the central nervous system, cardiac, and so on. More specifically, The most common markers were cyanosis, absence of regular breathing pattern, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, use of anticonvulsants, and seizures. Relating these into the hospital, into rates within the hospital, and these are hospital delivery rates, we don't have population level data. We found that overall rates of near miss were higher in Benin and Burkina Faso compared to Morocco. That won't be particularly surprising for anyone who knows this setting. The overall rate of neonatal near miss amongst all births taking place in the hospital was 15 per 1,000 births, per 1,000 live births, but that ranged between 6 in Morocco and 40 in Benin. There were about twice as many neonatal near miss as neonatal deaths. However, there were far more perinatal deaths than neonatal near miss, and that's because there was a very, very large burden of stillbirths taking place within these settings. The perinatal deaths are shown by the blue bars on the bar charts. The darker blue is the stillbirths, and the lighter blue on the top is the neonatal deaths. And you can see that more stillbirths are taking place than either neonatal near miss or neonatal deaths in this setting. Unsurprisingly, there's a very strong association between complications in the mother and complications in the newborn. The graph on your right shows neonatal near miss rates and perinatal death rates amongst those women who had a severe obstetric complication. Again, it varies by country, but between a fifth and a third of the time, if the mother had a severe complication, the baby died. So incredibly high rates of death in these hospitals. We then went on to compare these near miss, which we defined using organ function, markers of organ dysfunction, with the pragmatic markers, which are suggested by the WHO. So we're defining near miss, remember, according to organ dysfunction. And what we found, first of all, I'd like to just point out that we found gestational age incredibly difficult to collect in this setting. Huge numbers of missing values, and overwhelmingly that was because either the doctor or the midwife had marked "don't know" on the form rather than they'd left it blank. However, obviously gestational age, birth weight and APGAR score are highly correlated, so there wasn't any infant who had missing values for all of these three outcomes. Premature babies, very small babies with a very low APGAR score are disproportionately represented amongst the near miss. That's as we'd expect. However, there was also quite a high number of neonates who were near miss by one set of criteria, but not by the other. And moving on here, this is looking just at the neonatal near miss by organ dysfunction criteria. The dark blue bars at the bottom are those who are near miss according to both the organ function criteria and the pragmatic markers. The lighter blue are those who are near miss according to the organ dysfunction criteria but not the pragmatic markers. And what we can see here is amongst the near miss, only between 21 and 29% were these very small premature babies with low APGAR score. However, amongst the neonatal deaths, between 61 and 69% of the deaths were very small. And what this suggests is that the pragmatic markers and the organ dysfunction markers are picking up slightly different things. In this particular setting, if an infant is that premature, that small, has that lower APGAR score, they're very, very sick. Whereas the organ function criteria are picking up perhaps a slightly lower level of severity. And that brings on, that leads to a question of what are we actually measuring near miss for. In maternal health, one of the main motivations for using a near miss is because maternal death is such a rare event. And a near miss is supposed to be a proxy of death, and it's a way of us getting greater numbers. Here, the pragmatic markers appear to be proxying death better than the organ dysfunction markers. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best thing that you want to be looking at if what you're interested in is quality of care and identifying improvements could be made within, could be identifying improvements to be made within the facility. So arguably they're measuring slightly different things. The overwhelming key finding that we found from the study is that in this particular setting, neonatal near miss is a slightly redundant concept because there are so many deaths, and it's not really worth spending time worrying about how we should define neonatal near miss when there are so many infants dying. You don't need a proxy at this stage. The most common markers of near miss were related to respiratory system, and the majority of deaths were these extremely premature babies, whereas the majority of the neonatal miss, according to organ dysfunction, were not. Collecting data on the newborn is a huge challenge in these settings. Everything's paper-based. The baby if it's a sick baby, is usually cared for in a different place to the mother. If you've got a paper form, that means you've got to somehow get between the two. Also, the mother may have delivered at home and the neonate may have been brought into the hospital, so the baby may never have even been in the delivery room. So collecting all this information when different teams are looking after the baby, they're in different places, is an incredible challenge. However, one encouraging thing that did come out of our study is just the fact that we were collecting this data, got the obstetric teams and the paediatric teams at least talking to each other, and discussions have at least started in that manner. But